6 years of abandonment. Not a single call, not a message, not even a whisper of an explanation. Then my parents strolled into the shop I built from nothing, sitting down as if they had never left. "Sign over 25% of this perfume boutique to us," my father said. "If you don't, I'll call your investors tonight and everything will crumble before sunrise." Those were his words. What they don't realize is that I am no longer the daughter they knew 6 years ago. And I've already prepared a gift for them, something that will leave them utterly speechless. Thank you for being here. It means everything. While you settle in, leave a comment below and tell me where in the world you are watching from. Country City. Let's see how far this reaches. Also worth noting, this story contains some fictional elements crafted for entertainment and educational purposes. Any similarity to names or settings is coincidental, but the message inside it, I believe, is one that stays with you. The last customer of the afternoon had barely cleared the door when Jamie appeared at the entrance to the mixing room, holding her clipboard to her chest, the way people hold things when they're carrying news they didn't ask to deliver. I knew before she said a word. Not the specifics, not the Wednesday, not the folder, not the particular way my father would choose to sit in my best client chair with his coat still on, but the shape of it, the return, the hands out. "There are two people in the showroom," Jamie said carefully. "They didn't have a reservation. They said—" She paused in the way people pause when they're deciding how much information is actually useful. "They said you'd understand." I set down the sample vial I had been labeling. Cedar and black pepper, a winter blend I'd been adjusting for 3 weeks. I capped it without finishing the label and placed it back in the rack. "What do they look like?" I asked, though I already knew. "Older, a man and a woman. The man is in a coat." She glanced toward the showroom doors, then back at me. "He sat down in the consultation chair without being asked." Of course he did. I untied my white apron, folded it once, and hung it on the hook beside the supply shelf. I did not rush. There was no version of this evening that was improved by rushing, and I had learned a long time ago that the person who moves slowly in a room tends to control it. The showroom was warm when I stepped through the doors, cedar and jasmine from the diffuser near the entrance. The soft amber lighting I had chosen specifically because it made the glass shelving glow without being obvious about it. The name on the front door caught the last of the afternoon sun from outside Sloane's etched in gold leaf I had paid for myself letter by letter the week before we opened 4 years ago. My father was sitting in the consultation chair. My mother was in the guest seat beside him, her phone face down in her lap. She was not looking at it. She was not looking at the room either. She was doing the third thing, the particular stillness of a woman who has decided in advance how a conversation is going to end and is simply waiting for the rest of the participants to catch up. 6 years. Warren looked up when he saw me and smiled the way people smile when they want you to believe that no time has passed at all. He had aged. They both had. His hair had gone fully silver at the temples, and there were lines at the corners of his eyes that I didn't remember. I registered all of this in the 4 seconds it took me to walk from the doorway to the edge of the nearest display table, and then I stopped. I did not sit down. I needed the height, the small, deliberate advantage of being the only one in the room still on their feet. "There she is," he said. "You need to leave," I said. "I have client appointments at 6:30. Patricia finally looked up. Her expression was the careful neutral of someone who has prepared for every version of this conversation. "We drove 4 hours, Sloane. The least you can do is hear us out." "Sign over 25% of this boutique to us by the end of the night," Warren said. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat, still on. I noticed as though he hadn't planned on staying long, or as though he wanted me to believe he hadn't, and produced a folder which he set on the display table between us, with the slow, deliberate motion of a man who had already decided how this was going to go. "We had a lawyer draw it up. It's clean." I looked at the folder. Color-coded tabs along the right edge, signature lines already flagged with adhesive markers. Someone had done this carefully. Someone had done this more than once. "You drove 4 hours on a Wednesday," I said, "without calling. We knew you wouldn't pick up." Patricia set her phone face down on the table. "You never do." "There's a reason for that." I looked at the folder, then back at him. "I have appointments at 6:30. You need to leave." "We're not going anywhere." Warren leaned back in my chair in my boutique bought with money I had earned without a single phone call from either of them in 6 years. Not until we talk. I looked at my mother. She was watching me with the expression I had known since childhood. Patient, faintly sad, the performance of a woman who had decided she was the reasonable one before the conversation started. Then we'll talk at 8:30, I said. I'll come back to this table at 8:30 and we'll go through everything properly. Warren glanced at Patricia. Something moved between them, the silent arithmetic of two people who have been negotiating the same terms for decades. 8:30, he said. Fine. I turned toward the back of the store. I did not look at the folder again. I had already seen what I needed to see, the clean tabs, the flagged pages, the way a man sets something down when he is certain it is going to be picked up. He had not come here on impulse. He had planned the drive, the timing, the legal paperwork, the choice of a Wednesday evening when I would be here alone after the last customer before close. All of it deliberate, all of it arranged. The question was not why he had come. The question was who had told him enough to make it worth the drive. I had built this room to make people feel welcome the moment they stepped in. Standing there while my father outlined what he intended to take from me, I understood for the first time that the feeling worked in both directions. You need to leave, I said again. I've said it twice now. And I've answered it twice now. Warren picked up the folder from the table and set it back down slightly closer to my side. An adjustment of position, not substance. Sit down, Sloane. I'm fine standing. He looked at me for a moment, the particular look of a man recalibrating, and then he spread his hands flat on the table in a gesture I recognized from childhood. It meant he was about to explain something he had already explained once and didn't want to explain again. I have a problem, he said. I need you to understand the shape of it before you react. I said nothing. I let him talk. The investment had begun 3 years ago, a real estate partnership in what he described as a stable market, with a partner who came with what he called excellent references. The partner turned out to be neither excellent nor particularly interested in following through on anything. By the time the structure collapsed, Warren had put in $385,000 across 4 separate personal loans. The partner had become unreachable, and the creditors who had financed those loans were very much not. They've started enforcement proceedings, he said. The timeline is tighter than I'd like. $385,000, I said. I kept my voice neutral, the voice of someone processing numbers, not reacting to them, in personal loans. Spread across 3 years, the interest has compounded. And 25% of Sloane's addresses this how exactly? He leaned forward slightly. The stake doesn't need to cover the full amount. That's not how this works. It shows the creditors I have assets, something documented, something with verifiable value, something they can look at while I renegotiate the payment terms. The 25% buys time. It doesn't need to liquidate anything. I understood immediately what he was doing. This was not a solution. This was a prop. He needed something on paper that looked like assets so that the people he owed money to would agree to extend his timeline. The moment those creditors grew tired of renegotiation or decided Sloane's was worth more to them than his goodwill, the stake would mean something very different from what he was describing now. And if the creditors enforce against that stake while negotiations stall? I asked. If they put a lien on my business before the payment plan is settled, that won't happen. You don't know that. I looked at him steadily. You said the same thing about the investment partner, about the references, about the original timeline on the loans. I paused. You've said that won't happen about several things that happened anyway. His jaw tightened, barely visible the way his tells always were. He had a good face for negotiation. I had spent 29 years learning to read the edges of it. 25% gives my creditors something concrete while I work out the terms, he said again, choosing his words more carefully this time. Day to day, nothing changes for you. You run the business the same way you always have. It changes everything if they decide to enforce. They won't. I looked at my mother. Patricia was sitting with her hands folded on the table. The practiced stillness of a woman who has been in this version of the conversation before and already knows which part belongs to her. She met my eyes briefly, not an apology, not a plea, a prompt. Your father has been working on this for months, she said. This isn't something that came up overnight. I can see that, I said. The tabs on the folder are color-coded. Warren reached into the inside pocket of his coat and produced a business card which he set on the table between us without looking at it. I know people at Hargrove Capital, he said. We have a mutual connection. One conversation with the right person, and your Series A review becomes complicated. He met my eyes. I don't want to do that. I'm asking for a piece of paper, Sloane. That's all. There it was. I had been waiting for it since the moment I walked out of the mixing room, the move underneath the move, the actual pressure point. He hadn't driven 4 hours to make a reasonable request. He had driven 4 hours because he had something to hold over me, and the folder was simply the paperwork he'd brought to make the threat look like a favor. I looked at the business card. I did not touch it. If Warren walks out of here tonight without saying the words out loud, I thought the $47,000 disappears with him. The statute of limitations is my clock, not his. I need him at this table. I need him comfortable and patient and still believing that he is the one running this room. 8:30, I said. Come back to this table at 8:30. I'll hear you out properly and we'll go through the paperwork together. Warren looked at Patricia. She gave him the smallest possible nod, the kind that means, yes, this is what we expected. This is fine. 8:30, he said. That's fine. He turned toward the front of the store and raised one hand, not quite a wave, more of an assumption, and called out pleasantly and without hesitation for someone to bring 2 coffees. Jamie appeared at the far edge of the showroom. She looked at Warren, then at me. I gave her one small nod. Yes, bring the coffee. Do it without comment. She turned and walked toward the back without a word. Good. I headed toward the mixing room, keeping my pace, even the pace I used with difficult clients, steady and unhurried, the pace of someone who has nowhere more important to be because she is exactly where she intends to be. Behind me, I heard Warren say something to Patricia in a low voice. I didn't catch the words. I didn't need the words. The tone was enough. Satisfied. The particular satisfaction of a man who believes the room has just moved the way he planned. When I reached the hallway, I stopped for 3 seconds and did the arithmetic. Hargrove Capital. He had said the name the way you say something you've known for a long time, casually, without effort, as though it had simply occurred to him. It had not simply occurred to him. He had been told. And the list of people who knew enough about my investors, my funding structure, my business to give him that name. That list was not long. I already recognized most of the names on it. The mixing room smelled like work. Not the finished kind, but the kind still in process, still becoming something. I needed that right now, something honest. I closed the door behind me and stood in the middle of the room for a moment. Not to collect myself, I was already collected. I was doing something more deliberate than that. I was resetting the frame, reminding myself exactly where the ground was. The room was narrow, lit by overhead panels that cast clean, cold white light across the stainless steel workbench, the rows of labeled glass bottles, the small precision scale I used for measurements I didn't trust to approximation. Along the back wall, the shelves held raw materials in amber glass bergamot, from Calabria vetiver, from a supplier in Haiti beeswax, absolute in a small jar. I had been carefully rationing for 2 years because the batch had been discontinued. The room smelled like beginning, like things that had not yet decided what they were going to be. In the corner of the bench where I had placed it 4 years ago, and where it had remained ever since, was a leather notebook. Brown, worn soft at the edges from 30 years of being carried. Frances Voss had carried it before I did. She was the one who had taught me to actually smell, not to identify, not to label, but to pay genuine attention. When I was 12, she had lined up 3 testing strips in front of me and told me to describe what I experienced. Not what I thought I was supposed to say, not the vocabulary. Tell me what you smell, she said, not what you think it's called. She had no patience for performance even then, especially then. When she died in 2018, Warren had the house cleared in under a week. I found out from a neighbor, not from him, not from my mother, from a woman who had lived 3 doors down for 20 years and assumed I already knew. By the time I drove out to Millbrook, the furniture was gone. The bookshelves were empty. The kitchen had been stripped of everything, including the ceramic canisters that had sat on the counter since before I was born. A cardboard box arrived in the mail 11 days later. Inside it, a silver bracelet I recognized from her wrist, her reading glasses in a case with a scratch along the left lens, and the notebook. I had never asked Warren about the house. There was no version of that conversation that ended in anything useful. The notebook fell open to the first page almost on its own. Now the binding had softened from years of handling. Francis's handwriting was in blue fountain pen, slanted and precise. Winter number 1. Top bergamot pink pepper. Heart iris cedarwood. Base vetiver white musk beeswax absolute. Beside each ingredient, careful annotations, ratios, temperatures, processing notes, and a small star next to the beeswax with the single word patience written alongside it. That was the first formula I had ever sold under my own name. It was still on the front display shelf, third from the left. I closed the notebook and set it back exactly where it had been. Then I picked up my phone. "They're here, on schedule." The reply came before I had set the phone down. "Already driving, back door." 3 words, then 3 more. Eleanor's texts always arrived in pairs, the fact, and then the direction. I had learned over 7 years to read both together. I was still holding the phone when someone knocked twice on the mixing room door. Jamie's knock, 2 quick taps, the one she used when something had happened in the front of the store that wasn't an emergency, but wasn't nothing either. "Come in." She opened the door a few inches and held it there, not stepping all the way inside. She had a particular talent for this, for hovering at the edge of situations until she understood whether she was actually needed. "The gentleman up front asked if we carry oat milk," she said with the careful neutrality of someone reporting information they find personally unreasonable. I looked at her for a moment. "For the coffee," she added. "Tell him we have whole milk," I said, "and that he's welcome to leave whenever he's ready." Jamie considered this for exactly 2 seconds. "I'll tell him we're out." "That works." She started to pull the door closed, then paused. "Is there anything I should know, in case something happens while you're back here?" I picked up the leather notebook from the corner of the bench, held it for a moment, feeling the worn softness of the cover, the slight unevenness where the binding had been repaired once years before. It came to me and set it back down in its exact corner. "Not yet," I said, "but stay close." She nodded and closed the door without making a sound. That was one of the things I valued most about Jamie. She understood when a room needed to stay quiet. I stood for another moment in the cold light, then walked out into the narrow hallway that connected the back rooms to the showroom corridor. It ran past the storage closet, the bathroom, and the secondary shelving, where we kept the seasonal stock rotations that hadn't made it to the floor yet. Gavin was at the far end of the hall reorganizing the sample tester display. This was the 3rd time this week he had reorganized that shelf. I had noticed it Monday and filed it under nothing and moved on. I was not filing it under nothing anymore. I said his name. He turned, and for the space of 1 full second, his eyes didn't quite reach mine. They landed somewhere on the wall just behind my left shoulder, adjusted, and then found my face. The correction was small, the kind of thing that would have been invisible to someone who hadn't spent 4 years working alongside him every week. I caught it. "Everything okay out front?" he asked. His voice was exactly right, even, appropriately curious. The voice of a person who had heard there were unexpected visitors and was asking a completely normal follow-up question. "Fine," I said. I walked past him toward the back door. Behind me, I heard him set something down on the shelf. Deliberate, careful, the sound of a person making sure their hands had something neutral to do. I didn't look back. I had seen enough faces in enough difficult moments to know what I had just seen and what it was not. That was not the look of a man who was busy. That was the look of a man carrying something he was no longer certain he could keep carrying. There is a version of this story where I went back out to the showroom immediately. I didn't. I went to my office instead because there was one thing I needed to look at before I said another word to anyone. The office was at the end of the back corridor, a small room that smelled like cold coffee and printer paper. The particular combination that means a place where actual work gets done rather than displayed. I sat down at the desk and opened my laptop without turning on the overhead light. The screen was bright enough. The folder was in the second to last position in my document archive, sitting behind 4 years of business files and lease records and tax documentation that I kept organized with the kind of precision that comes from not being able to afford disorder. I had not opened this particular folder in 8 months. I opened it now. The file was a PDF, dated March 14, 2019. A credit report I had pulled from a free monitoring service after noticing an unfamiliar account reference in an automated alert. The kind of alert that most people dismiss without reading. I had been 23 years old, working double shifts at a fragrance distribution company across town, sending 60% of each paycheck toward a loan balance I had not taken out and had not agreed to, and building a business plan in the margins of a small notebook I kept in my jacket pocket because I could not afford to stop moving. Line 7 of the report read, Personal Installment Loan, $47,000. Origination March 2016. Status Open Current. Borrower of record Sloane M. Voss. I had read it 3 times before I fully processed what I was looking at. Then I had sat down on the floor of my studio apartment, my laptop balanced on my knees, a cup of coffee on the floor beside me that had gone cold without my noticing, and I had called my father. He had picked up. That was the part I still return to in the way you return to things that don't resolve cleanly. The fact that he had picked up as though the call had been expected, as though he had been somewhere nearby and had been waiting for it to come. That's what family does, Sloane, he had said after I explained what I had found. He hadn't denied it. He hadn't apologized. He had simply explained it in the particular patient tone he used when he believed someone was failing to grasp a situation they should have grasped by now. You lived under our roof. Your mother and I gave you everything you had growing up. This is how these things work. I had not said much after that. I had listened to him finish, said that I understood, and then ended the call. That was the last conversation I had with either of my parents for 6 years. The 52 calls came afterward spread across the following 8 months, placed from various locations, the parking lot of the distribution company. During breaks, my car before early morning shifts the apartment on the nights when I had managed to convince myself that trying again was still a reasonable thing to do. Warren did not pick up. My mother did not pick up. Not once across 52 separate attempts over 8 months. I had not made those calls because I believed they would answer. I had made them because I needed to know with the kind of certainty you can only reach by exhausting the available evidence that I had tried enough. That the distance that was coming was something I arrived at after running out of alternatives, not before. By the end of month 8, I had my answer. I stopped calling. I paid off the final balance on the loan in January of 2021, 3 months before I signed the lease on the space that would become Sloane's. I closed the credit report and let the screen sit dark for a moment. Then my phone rang. Eleanor's number. I picked up on the second ring. Parking now, she said. 2 minutes. Back door is open. Jamie knows to let you in. I paused. I need to talk to you about Gavin before we go over anything else. A brief silence on her end, not hesitation. Eleanor's pauses were never hesitation. They were the deliberate stillness of someone deciding which information to release and in what order. I know about Gavin, she said. I'll explain when I'm inside. I held the phone still for a moment after she said it. I had not mentioned Gavin's name in any of our 3 calls over the past 3 days. I had told her about Warren's threat, about the timeline, about what I needed from her legally, and how quickly I needed it. I had not said anything about Gavin. I had not described the shelf he kept reorganizing, or the split second in the hallway, or the way his eyes had needed to correct themselves when I said his name. She already knew. How are they? She asked, moving forward the way she always did toward the next thing that needed addressing. Comfortable. Warren ordered coffee. I paused. He mentioned Hargrove by name. A shorter silence this time. He couldn't have found that on his own. No, I said, he couldn't have. We'll get to it. Her voice shifted not in speed, but in the particular quality of precision that I had learned to recognize over 7 years of working with her. Sloane, I need you to hear me clearly on this. You can still call the police right now. Trespassing plus the threat he made about your investors, it's enough. I can have them out before 6. I know. But if Warren walks out tonight without saying the words out loud, the $47,000 leaves with him. No documentation. No admission on record. Just a family that drove 4 hours and drove home again. The statute of limitations is your window, Sloane, not his. That's why I'm not calling. I looked at the bottom drawer of the desk. Not yet. All right. The pause she made was brief and exact the way her pauses always were. Then I'll see you in a few minutes. She ended the call. I set the phone down and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a single thin folder, no label on the front, no tabs, no color coding. On the first interior page, in my own handwriting, 2016 to 2019. Documentation. Below that, a list of contents I had not needed to reference in 3 years, the original credit report. Bank records of every payoff transfer, correspondence with the lender, 2 letters I had written and never sent. I did not open it. I did not need to. I had read every page in that folder enough times to reconstruct the contents from memory and sequence without missing a line. I closed the drawer. I looked at the clock on the laptop screen. 6:10. Eleanor would be at the back door in under 2 minutes. I adjusted my posture back, straight hands flat on the desk. Not braced, not crossed. The posture of someone who is ready rather than waiting. There is a distinction between those two things, and it matters which one the room reads off of you when you walk back into it. Gavin was reorganizing the sample tester shelf for the 3rd time this week. That detail, which I had stored without examining, now settled into place the way things settle when you finally stop ignoring them with a small, distinct click, like a key finding a lock you hadn't known was there. I stood at the far end of the hallway and said his name. He set down the bottle in his hand. Not quickly, carefully, the way you set something down when you want the action to look normal, and it costs you something to make it look that way. He turned. This time his eyes found mine without any adjustment. He had decided somewhere between the hallway a few minutes ago and right now to stop trying to conceal the fact that he was concealing something that I thought was either progress or strategy. With Gavin, it was usually difficult to tell. He called you, I said, not a question. Tell me what he said. Gavin let out a breath, not quite a sigh, too contained for that. He leaned back slightly against the storage shelving and crossed his arms not defensively, but in the manner of someone who is about to tell the truth and is bracing himself for what comes after it. Warren had contacted him approximately 3 weeks earlier. He had introduced himself as Sloane's father, said it plainly, without any apparent awareness that the information might land badly, and asked how things were going at the store. General questions, Gavin said. How's business? How's the neighborhood? The kind of easy, interested-sounding inquiry that people use when they want information but don't want to appear to be collecting it. Gavin had answered in kind. The store was doing well. It had been a strong year. He had said it the way you talk about a colleague's business to someone you assume has a reason to ask. And then Warren had asked one more thing. He wanted to know what time you usually close on Wednesdays, Gavin said. He asked it like an afterthought, like he had almost forgotten to bring it up. And you told him. I told him before I finished understanding why he was asking. Gavin didn't look away. By the time I worked out what the question actually meant, I had already answered it. I let that sit for a moment. The closing time. A Wednesday. The precise combination of information that would allow someone to show up at exactly the right moment after the last customer before lockup in the narrow window when I would be here without backup and without witnesses from the outside. Every detail of tonight had been arranged around that answer. The SBA application, I said. His jaw tightened, briefly controlled. He had documentation on the 2021 partnership dispute, Gavin said. I don't know how he found it. The civil filing is public record, but the specifics... He stopped. It doesn't matter how he found it. He had it. And he was very clear about what he intended to do with it if I didn't cooperate. The SBA loan application had been in process for 18 months. A business expansion Gavin had been building toward carefully and methodically the way he approached most things he cared about. A civil dispute from 2021, even one that had been resolved without a judgment, was the kind of detail that a loan officer flagged and took time to evaluate. Time that Gavin did not have. A single call from Warren to the right person would not necessarily kill the application, but it would delay it long enough for the approval window to close. Long enough for the funding opportunity to pass. So he gave you something to lose, I said, and then told you exactly what it would cost to keep it. Yes, the word was flat, undefended. And warning me was the one thing you could do without fully complying. 3 days ago, as soon as I understood what he was actually planning, not just that he was planning something. Gavin looked at his hands briefly, then back at me. I know 3 days wasn't enough. I know what I should have done instead. You told him the closing time on Wednesdays, I said. That's how he planned tonight. Yes, there was a particular quality to that single word. No self-pity, no justification, no attempt to rearrange the facts into something more flattering. Just the weight of something that couldn't be taken back, and that he apparently had no interest in pretending could be. I looked at him for a long moment. I had known Gavin for 4 years. He had sourced our bergamot supplier and renegotiated the import terms on 3 separate materials when costs shifted and covered a double shift during a holiday staffing shortage without being asked. He was not a person who made careless choices. He was a person who had been maneuvered into a position where the available choices had all been made costly, and he had taken the one that allowed him to give me the most warning while protecting the most he could. That did not make it simple. It made it human, which was a different thing. Stay here tonight, I said. He looked up. I need you visible in the front of the showroom at 8:15. Don't avoid Warren. Don't disappear into the back. I want him to see you standing there. I paused. Can you do that? Yes. He straightened slightly. What are you going to do? What I've been planning for 3 days. I turned toward the back door. Stay visible, Gavin. Be somewhere he can see you. I want him comfortable, and comfort requires consistency. And after tonight, I stopped with my hand on the door frame. We'll figure that out after tonight. I pushed the door open. Jamie was standing just outside it, holding the exterior handle. She had positioned herself in the precise way she always positioned herself in uncertain situations, right at the edge of what was happening, ready to move in either direction, depending on which one was needed. Beside her, in the narrow gap between the building and the delivery alley, stood Eleanor Marsh. She was exactly as I had last seen her 2 weeks ago. Silver hair cut close to her head, coat folded over one arm, with the particular efficiency of someone who had stopped wasting energy on unnecessary adjustments long ago. She carried a laptop bag on one shoulder, and tucked under the same arm as her coat, a thin folder I did not recognize. No label on the front cover. No tabs along the edge, nothing on the outside to indicate its contents or when it had been put together. Over the past 3 days, Eleanor had forwarded me documentation, the draft loan agreement, the asset search summary, the recording protocol memo. I had read everything she had sent. This folder had not been part of any of it. She looked at me with the expression she used when she had already assessed a situation and determined it was workable. Let's go inside, she said. Eleanor Marsh had been in more courtrooms than she could count, and she carried that in the particular way she entered a room, not loudly, but completely, the way a door fills its frame when it closes all the way. She shut the office door behind her and sat down across the desk without waiting to be invited. That was a quality I had always valued in her, the refusal to perform uncertainty she didn't feel. She laid her coat over the back of the chair, set the laptop bag on the floor, and kept the thin, unlabeled folder balanced on her knee. She had not yet explained what was inside it, and I understood from the way she held it that she wasn't going to until she was ready. Tell me what happened, she said. I told her. I went through it in the order it had occurred, Warren. In the consultation chair, the folder with the flagged signature lines, the request for 25%. The explanation about the creditors and the failed real estate partnership, and the number $385,000 in personal loans, most of it gone to a partner who no longer existed in any verifiable location. The threat about Hargrove Capital, the way my father had delivered it casually, like someone reading from a list they had memorized and were now simply getting through. Eleanor listened the way she always listened. No interruptions, no signals about where her attention was landing. When I finished, she set both hands flat on the folder in her lap and was quiet for a moment. He mentioned Hargrove by name, she said. Yes, he doesn't have a connection there. She said it with the particular flatness of someone reporting a fact they confirmed before they needed to. I checked 2 days ago. No mutual contact, no business relationship, no shared history with anyone in their current structure. He was speculating that the name alone would be enough. For most people it would have been, I said. For the person he thought he was driving to see tonight, yes, I expect so. She opened the laptop and turned the screen so it faced both of us across the narrow desk. The line of credit. You asked about it on Monday, so let me walk through it clearly. Your Series A agreement with Hargrove includes a $300,000 business line of credit that hasn't been drawn against since it was established. We used $212,000 of it to purchase Warren's outstanding loans from his three creditors. I looked at the screen. The transaction was there, time-stamped November 11th. Three creditors, three separate amounts consolidated into a single note now held by Sloane's LLC. The terms are in your name, Eleanor continued. Hargrove doesn't receive itemized reporting on credit line usage. That's standard for revolving business instruments. They know the line exists. They don't know what it's allocated toward at any given time. That's the purpose of the instrument. She paused. Warren's creditors had been in default management mode for 3 months. They were relieved to have a buyer. 55 cents recovered more than they were expecting to see. And the documents for tonight. Ready. All of them. She reached into the laptop bag and produced a second folder, heavier with a rubber band around the outside. She set it on the desk between us. 11 pages. The instrument is a secured business loan agreement, not an equity transfer. The asset guarantee clause is on page 7. It's enforceable, it's correctly drafted, and it is written in language that a person who is not a lawyer and who is several cups of coffee into a conversation he believes he's already won will read as standard protective boilerplate. And if he asks about it directly, he will ask about it, she said, and you will explain it correctly, accurately, without misrepresenting a single word. Before either of them picks up a pen tonight, I will read the title of every document out loud. The full title. Not a paraphrase, not a summary, the actual language. Everything will be exactly what it says it is. She looked at me. The strength of this does not come from misleading him, Sloane. It comes from the fact that he'll sign it anyway, because by the time the pen is in his hand, he'll have already decided the details don't matter. Men who believe they're winning rarely read carefully. I looked at the 11 pages on the desk. I had read the draft 3 times since Eleanor had sent it Monday evening. I knew every clause. I understood what Warren would think each clause meant, and I understood what each clause actually meant. And I understood that those two readings were separated by a gap he would not discover until long after the ink was dry. He'll sign it, I said. Yes. Eleanor reached for the coffee Jamie had brought in black, no sugar, the same way she had taken it for as long as I had known her. He came here tonight because he understands his leverage, his pressure points, and the shape of the conversation he expects to have. He drove 4 hours because he has spent 29 years understanding exactly how you respond to certain kinds of pressure. She set the cup down. What he does not understand is that the conversation he prepared for ended 3 days ago. I had known Eleanor for 7 years. She was the one who had looked at my first lease and circled 6 clauses that would have cost me the business before the second year was out, handing it back without a word of discouragement. She had told me when I was 22 and building something from nothing that the difference between a business and a wish was documentation. She had said it the same way she said everything that mattered without ornamentation because she didn't believe ornamentation served the information. You knew him before you knew me, I said. 23 years. Neighbors in Millbrook from 1994 to 2017. She turned the laptop screen fully toward me. Long enough to know exactly how he reads a room, and precisely how he misreads one when he's already decided the outcome is settled. On the screen was a financial summary. Warren's name at the top. Below it, columns organized by creditor amounts, origination dates, default notices, the purchase price Eleanor had negotiated for each. I had seen most of this in the documentation she had forwarded over the past 2 days. I scanned it quickly, confirming the figures I had already memorized. Then Eleanor moved the cursor to a line near the bottom of the screen. A separate entry indented slightly below the main creditor summary with a different origination date than the rest. Guarantee filing, September 2017. Guarantor of record and then a name. Not Warren's. I read it once, then I read it again more slowly to make sure I was reading it correctly. Then I looked up. Eleanor was watching me with the stillness she used when she had already arrived at a conclusion and was waiting for the room to catch up. She didn't know, she said. Not a question, not a comfort. A fact she had verified and was now placing between us exactly the way she had placed everything else she had brought into this office tonight, precisely and without ceremony. I had thought I understood the shape of what my father had done. Eleanor showed me. I had only ever seen the outline, the rest of it had been happening in rooms I wasn't into, people I hadn't thought to ask about. She began with the numbers, because that was how Eleanor began everything, with the facts that could be confirmed before moving to the facts that required interpretation. 4 personal loans taken over a period of 3 years, totaling $385,000. The pattern was consistent across all 4. Warren had borrowed against anticipated returns from a real estate partnership he had described in each loan application as a stable investment vehicle with an established track record. The partnership had neither. By the time the structure collapsed, the money was gone, and the partner, a man who had operated under 3 different business names across 2 states, had ceased to exist in any form that a process server could locate. Formal enforcement had begun 3 months ago. That was the timeline. He took the first loan in the spring of 2022, Eleanor said, scrolling through the documents on screen. The last one was originated 14 months later in July of 2023. He kept borrowing as the losses compounded. Either he believed each new round would recover what the previous one had lost, or he understood by that point that it wouldn't and borrowed anyway. Does it matter which? I asked. Not legally. Not tonight. She moved to the next section. What matters tonight is this. The entry was the one I had seen near the bottom of the summary. The 2017 guarantee filing slightly indented below the main creditor data with the name that was not Warren's. Eleanor walked me through it methodically. In September of 2017, a separate business loan had been originated by a third-party lender, $210,000 secured against a commercial real estate project Warren had held an interest in. The loan had required a personal guarantee from a secondary signatory. Warren had obtained that guarantee from Patricia. He had placed the guarantee document inside a stack of papers he described to her as the annual homeowner's insurance renewal forms. They updated together each fall, forms she had been signing for 15 years because he managed the household finances and she had trusted him to manage them correctly. She had initialed 3 pages. The third page was the guarantee. The primary borrower on that loan defaulted in August of this year, Eleanor said. Until that point, the creditor had no reason to pursue the secondary guarantee. The loan was being serviced, payments were current. It was only when the primary default occurred that they moved to enforce Patricia's obligation. She paused. She has been a co-debtor on a $210,000 loan for 8 years without knowing it. I sat with that for a moment. How did you get the guarantee filing? I asked. The actual document. During the purchase negotiation, Eleanor said. When we approached the creditors about acquiring Warren's outstanding loan portfolio, the largest holder provided full documentation as part of their standard due diligence disclosure. When a distressed note transfers, the buyer needs the complete picture of the borrower's obligations. They gave us everything. She looked at me briefly, including that. I looked at my mother's name on the screen again, on a document she had signed without knowing what she was agreeing to. Beside a dollar figure she had never been told she was responsible for, in a transaction she had never known existed. She can challenge it, I said. The guarantee, if she argues she was deceived into signing. Technically, yes. Fraud in the inducement, it's a recognized offense and given the documentation a persuasive one. Eleanor nodded once. But challenging it means litigation. It means discovery. It means everything Warren has done, the personal loans, the $47,000 in your name, this guarantee becomes part of the public court record. She met my eyes. She would need to decide what she wants, more relief from the debt or the version of her marriage that exists before that record is open. That's her decision to make, I said. Yes, and it is not your leverage, Sloane. Eleanor's voice was exact, not unkind. You don't need Patricia to remain in that debt for any of this to function. What you need tonight is Warren's signature on the instrument he came here believing would give him something. His name, his obligation, his assets on the line. She set her hand flat on the 11-page folder. The guarantee filing is for Patricia, not for you. It belongs to her. A silence settled between us, the kind that follows a complete picture, when the person receiving it needs a moment to let the edges come into focus. She drove 4 hours with him tonight, I said. She did. She has been going along with things for 30 years, covering for him. Probably. Eleanor's voice remained level, not dismissive. but precise in the way she was precise about everything she considered worth saying carefully. And I would encourage you not to conflate that with knowledge. There is a meaningful difference between covering for someone and being in the dark about what you're covering for. People do both. They often do both at the same time in different compartments of the same life. She looked at me. I'm not telling you how to feel about it. I'm telling you it's worth distinguishing before the end of tonight. I thought about my mother in the guest chair, the particular neutral of her expression, the practiced patience. The way she had looked at Warren when he poured his own coffee and said nothing about hers. A small thing. The kind of small thing that only registers when you have already started looking for it, because something in the room has shifted, and you are paying attention differently than you were before. Eleanor reached for the unlabeled folder she had carried and the one that had not been part of any documentation she had forwarded over the past 3 days. She opened it, removed the guarantee filing, and placed it inside a clean folder from her bag. She wrote nothing on the outside. This one stays separate, she said. Timing is what will make it land correctly. I'll know when. I looked at the clock on the laptop screen, 6:52. Eleanor still had work to do, the final review of the loan instrument, the recording protocol confirmation. Warren and Patricia were in the showroom finishing coffee I had paid for, growing more comfortable by the minute, in the belief that the evening was resolving the way they had driven 4 hours to make it resolve. I needed to go back out there and give them more of that comfort. I needed to walk back into my own store and look like a daughter who has been thinking things over in the back room and has arrived slowly and reluctantly at the conclusion they had been expecting all along. I stood up. I had one thing to do before I reached the door. I walked to the small mirror on the back wall, the one I had put there years ago without knowing at the time what it would eventually be useful for. I looked at my own face. Not defeated, not angry. Something closer to tired, the particular specific tiredness of someone who has been holding something alone for a very long time and has finally reluctantly decided that the cost of holding it is no longer worth what the holding accomplishes. I held the expression until it felt accurate rather than performed. Then I opened the door. The expression I needed was not something that could be forced. It had to be found the way you find the right word in a language you're still learning, by circling from the outside until you arrive at the center. Tired was the closest word for it. Not the bone-deep exhaustion of someone who has given up, but the specific visible weight of a person who has been carrying something that reasonable people might have put down by now, and who is considering for the first time whether they might be allowed to. That was what I needed on my face when I walked back out there. Not performance, not defeat, that specific earned tiredness. I carried the tray down the hallway toward the showroom, 2 cups Earl Grey, a small pitcher of warm water, the leaves already steeping. I had not asked whether they wanted tea. I had simply made it because the evening needed to shift registers, and this was how you shifted them. The showroom was quieter than I had left it. Warren was still in the consultation chair, but he had removed his coat at some point while I was in the back. It was folded over the arm of the empty seat beside him, and the small adjustment gave him the appearance of a man who had settled in for the longer conversation he had been expecting all along. Patricia was sitting with her hands in her lap, not looking at anything in particular. I set the tray on the display table and sat down. It was the first time I had sat at that table since the evening began. I watched Warren's shoulders drop by a fraction, a small, involuntary release of tension that he probably wasn't aware of making. He had been reading signals all evening. I had just given him one he recognized. Patricia poured her own tea without waiting for anyone to offer. Warren didn't notice he was already reaching for his own cup, already settling into the version of this conversation he had prepared for on the 4-hour drive here. The one where the daughter finally stops performing resistance and sits down. I watched Patricia pour. She did it with the focused, slightly over-precise attention of someone who has learned to treat small domestic tasks as a form of self-containment. When she set the pitcher down, she glanced at Warren briefly in the way you glance at something you have looked at so many times that you no longer fully see it. The look was not warm. It was not hostile. It was the particular brand of fatigue that comes not from a single moment of exhaustion, but from years of the same weight, worn so smooth by repetition that it no longer registers as a feeling, only as a fact about the shape of the room. I saw it, I filed it, I said nothing. Tell me what actually happened, I said. Not the version for the lawyer, the real version. Warren set his cup down. He looked at me the way he looked at things he was deciding how to frame, a brief internal calculation visible only in the half-second delay before he began. He told me about the investment. The partner he had trusted with credentials that had checked out at the time. The initial returns that looked promising, and then slowed, and then reversed, and then stopped entirely. The loans he had taken to stay in because every significant loss contains a point at which the person experiencing it decides that doubling down is more bearable than admitting what has already occurred. He described it with the slightly clinical distance of someone narrating events they have rehearsed enough times that the emotion has been replaced by structure. He did not mention the dates. He did not mention the sequence Eleanor had shown me, the escalating loans taken long after the failure pattern had become clear. He gave me the shape of what had happened, not the weight of it. You built all of this yourself, Patricia said. Her hand moved slightly toward mine across the table, not quite making contact, hovering just short of it. We've always known that about you. 6 years is a long time to know something and not say it. Families lose touch. Warren set his cup down. It happens. People get busy, they get proud, they let things go longer than they mean to. 52 calls, I said quietly. I kept my voice even, not accusatory, not grieving. The tone of someone stating a number that had been counted. Over 8 months. Then I stopped. The table went completely still. Patricia was the one who broke it after a silence long enough to give the room a different texture. We weren't ready, she said. Her voice had changed thinner, as though something had been removed from the center of it. That's not an excuse. I know it isn't. It's just what it was. I looked at her. I had spent 6 years assigning her a fixed role in what had happened, and the role had always been clear. But the voice she had just used was not the voice of a person reading from a script. It was the voice of someone saying the only accurate thing available to them, which was also not enough. I didn't answer. I picked up my tea instead and held the cup in both hands, letting the warmth settle into my palms. Warren watched me do it, and I watched him read it, the lifted cup, the quieted posture, the absence of argument. His shoulders dropped another degree. He believed the room had moved in his direction. $385,000, he said. That's the full number. He said it without flinching, which told me he had been practicing it, probably in the car on the way here, saying it over and over until the digits stopped feeling as large as they were. I took a sip of tea. I set the cup down. I did not react. Across the table, Patricia exhaled a small sound, barely audible, immediately brought under control. I caught it in my peripheral vision without turning my head. Her eyes moved to Warren, and what crossed her face in that moment was not surprise, not alarm. Something older than both of those, the look of a person who has been watching a wall for cracks for a very long time and has just seen one open. I set my cup down. Tell me more, I said. My mother had a speech. I recognized it the moment she began, the particular cadence of it. The specific places where she paused, the architecture of guilt she had been constructing around my life, since before I had words to describe what was being built. It had taken me 3 years of weekly sessions with a therapist in a small office on the east side of the city before I could understand what the speech actually was. Before that, I had simply experienced it as a feeling, a specific weight that settled on my chest during certain conversations, the sensation of being simultaneously accused and celebrated, responsible and released. My therapist had given it a name on a Tuesday afternoon in February, while I was still wearing my work coat, and after she said the name, I had sat in the chair across from her for a long time without speaking. I was thinking about that Tuesday now while my mother talked. The speech, this version of it, went like this: the 6 years of silence had not been a choice exactly. They had been a recognition. Warren and Patricia had always known, had always believed, had always trusted that Sloane was the kind of person who did not need to be checked on. Who would be fine? Who would do more than fine? Who would build something, handle whatever arrived, navigate without needing anyone to hold a hand toward her? We leaned on that, Patricia said. Maybe more than we should have, with the specific inflection of someone who has located the single error in a long sequence of otherwise reasonable decisions. I listened to the framing settle into place. The 6 years of silence. The unanswered calls, the unreturned messages, the absence at every marker I had passed alone. In this version of the story, those were not failures of care. They were expressions of confidence. They were proof that I was capable. And surely a person who was capable enough to be trusted with all of that distance was capable enough to extend something now in this direction toward the people who had always known she would manage. My mother was very good at this. She had been practicing it since I was small enough that I could not recognize the structure while I was standing inside it. "You were always the one who never needed anyone," she said. Her hand moved toward mine on the display table slowly, as though the impulse had only just occurred to her, as though the gesture had not been thought through in advance. We leaned on that, probably more than we should have. I looked at our hands, hers over mine. The warmth of it was real. The intention behind it was not the thing it appeared to be. I kept my hand where it was. This was theater, and you did not break scene in the middle of an act. "If I sign over 25% and your creditors come after that stake," I said. "They won't," Warren said. "You've said that twice now." I looked at him steadily. About two completely different things. He met my eyes and held them. Neither of us moved. The table was quiet for a moment, with the specific quality of quiet that forms when two people are deciding whether they are going to say the next thing or let it pass. Patricia moved into the gap, the way she always moved into gaps, with warmth, with the language of common ground, with the vocabulary of people who have decided to be reasonable at you until you become reasonable back. She told me that they had not driven 4 hours to cause harm. She told me that family was not something you could simply decide to be finished with. She told me that the years of distance had cost them too, that there were things she had wished she had said, moments she had replayed, phone calls she had picked up and then set down without dialing. I noted the absence of specifics. She did not name which calls. She did not say which moments. The shape of regret, without the particular evidence that would make it verifiable. And yet her voice when she said it was not performing. That was the part I had to sit with. Whatever the technique, whatever the structure underneath the words, the feeling inside it was real. Both things could be simultaneously true, the calculation and the grief, and that was precisely what made the speech so difficult to be inside. It was not a lie dressed as truth. It was something worse, a truth being used as leverage. "You're the only one who can fix this," Warren said. He said it simply, without visible effort. "The way you state a fact, you believe everyone in the room already understands. You always have been." I looked at him across the table. I thought about the 7-year-old who had believed that was a compliment. I thought about the 23-year-old who had sat on a studio apartment floor and finally understood what it had always meant. "Let me get some documents from the back," I said. I stood. "I want to go through the details carefully before I sign anything." I looked at Warren. "Give me 20 minutes. His expression shifted just slightly, just enough. A small rearrangement around the eyes and at the corners of his mouth, the particular look of a man whose plan has just moved exactly as planned. He nodded. "Of course. Take your time." Patricia's hand left mine as I stood, and I felt the absence of it, the way you feel the release of pressure, a sudden sharp awareness of the weight that had been there. I picked up my folder from the chair behind me and turned toward the hallway. I was 3 steps from the table when I heard my mother's voice behind me, low, directed at Warren, not at me. "She's going to do it." I didn't break stride, I didn't turn around. But I heard the tone of it, and the tone was not triumph. It was not the voice of someone whose plan had succeeded. It was the voice of someone releasing something they had been bracing against, the specific sound of a body that has been holding tension and has finally reluctantly been allowed to let go. Relief, not victory. I pushed through the hallway door and let it close behind me. It should have felt clean. It didn't. Relief meant she had been afraid. Fear meant she had understood, at some level, that what they had driven here to ask for was not something they were owed, and she had come anyway. The two facts were sitting together in a way I was not going to finish thinking about tonight. I had 20 minutes. I needed to confirm something with Eleanor, something about the unmarked folder, the timing she had mentioned. And I needed to find Gavin before he positioned himself in the showroom because there were details he still needed. 20 minutes was enough if nothing ran long. It had to be enough. I was already walking. If you have made it this far, I want to know you are still here. Drop the number 10 in the comments right now, just that number. Because what is coming next is something I have been preparing for 3 days, and no one in that showroom knows it yet. I want to know who is watching when it does. One thing worth mentioning, this story contains fictional elements built for educational and entertainment purposes. Some details have been shaped for clarity and impact. If that is not something you are comfortable with, this is a good place to step away. No hard feelings. Eleanor was at the desk when I came in, the documents already spread in front of her. She didn't say hello, she pointed at the chair across from her, which meant we were starting immediately. I sat. Hargrove Capital and the Q3 revenue summary, she said without preamble. Gavin confirmed both during a follow-up call on Monday. He gave Warren the investor name and a general revenue figure for the third quarter. He didn't provide the full financial picture either. He didn't have access to the granular data, or he understood enough to stop there, but what he gave was sufficient for Warren to build the thread around. She looked at me. He was coerced. The SBA application is real, the timeline is real, and the leverage was specific enough to be effective. That's the full picture. Not malicious, I said. A person who was placed in a position where every available choice carried a cost, and who took the one that cost everyone the least amount, including you. He warned you 3 days out. Eleanor reached across and set the 11-page folder on my side of the desk. 3 days is not nothing. I pulled the folder toward me and opened it. Read the title on the first page, she said. I read it. Secured Business Loan Agreement between Sloane's LLC and Warren Voss, Personal Guarantor, and Patricia Voss, Personal Guarantor. The loan amount reflects outstanding debt obligations outlined in Exhibit A. That is what I will read aloud tonight, Eleanor said. Before any pen makes contact with any page, word for word, not a summary, not a paraphrase. Everything in that folder will be exactly what it says it is. She met my eyes. The reason this functions is not misdirection. The reason it functions is that by the time I read those words, he will have already decided they don't matter. He'll hear loan agreement and process it as formality. He'll hear personal guarantor and read it as standard language. He will not open Exhibit A. She picked up her own pen. Men who are certain they are winning do not read the details. And if he does, then we answer every question accurately and completely. Every clause means exactly what it says. She turned back to her copy. Go find Gavin. I need 15 minutes and you need that conversation finished before 8. I picked up the folder and went back into the hallway. Gavin was there. He was standing at the far end near the seasonal stock shelving, not doing anything in particular, the posture of someone who had been waiting in place long enough that they had stopped pretending to be occupied. He had stayed where I told him to stay and positioned himself where I would find him when I came out. He straightened when he heard the door. I walked toward him and stopped. I didn't say anything first. I let him begin. He called me on October 22nd, Gavin said. I looked up the date afterward. I wanted to know exactly when it happened, because I kept trying to figure out where the point was where I should have made a different choice. He didn't look away. He introduced himself, asked how the store was doing, and I answered in general terms. Then he asked about backing. I said we had institutional support. He said Hargrove and I confirmed it instead of deflecting. And then he asked about Q3, and I gave him a number, and the closing time on Wednesdays came at the end almost as an afterthought, and I answered it before I understood why he was asking. You answered all of it, I said. Yes, no justification in it, just the fact of it. I stood with that for a moment. October 22nd. The investor name, the revenue figure, the schedule. 4 pieces of information that had become the scaffolding for everything Warren had walked in here believing tonight. He cornered you, I said. Yes. Gavin said it the way you state a condition, something that existed and that explained the shape of what had followed without erasing responsibility for it. I still made the choices. I know. I looked at the folder in my hands, then back at him. Did you know what he was going to do with the information when you gave it to him? No. He said it without hesitation, without needing to search for it. I thought he was going to come here and ask you for help, the way a person does when they need something from someone they care about. I thought it was going to be a conversation. He doesn't operate that way. I understand that now. He held my gaze. I'm sorry, Sloane. Not because I need you to say it's all right, I know it isn't. I'm saying it because it's true. I listened to it, I did not answer it. There are apologies that require an immediate response and apologies that need time to be processed correctly. And this was the second kind, not because it wasn't genuine, but because the night still had 30 minutes in it, and I could not give the apology what it deserved without giving it something I didn't currently have to spare. Be at the front of the showroom at 8:15, I said. Visible, not performing, just present. I want Warren to see you standing there when we come back to the table. Gavin paused. What does that do? It reminds him that the people he tried to use are still standing in my building. I turned toward the showroom door. Don't avoid him. Don't make it conspicuous. Just be there, like you belong there, because you do. And after tonight, he asked. I turned toward the showroom door. Tonight first, I said. Everything else comes after. I pushed the door open an inch, just enough to see the showroom without being seen from it. Warren was in the consultation chair. Patricia had her tea. The room had the appearance of two people waiting comfortably for something they expected to receive. I let the door close. 11 pages, 7:58, 30 minutes. I took one slow breath, not to settle myself, but to switch. There is a specific internal adjustment that happens before you walk back into a room where something important is about to occur, and it is not the same thing as calming down. It is closer to the moment before music changes. Key a single beat of preparation, and then the shift. I was in that beat. Then the bell above the front entrance rang. Not my key, not Eleanor. Jamie's footsteps moved quickly toward the door, and then a voice carried in from the front of the showroom. Warm, unhurried, the voice of someone who came here every month without fail and had never once been expected to be anything other than welcome. Not the right moment, or exactly the right moment depending entirely on how you chose to look at it. I had not planned for this, which meant I was about to find out how well everything I had been practicing all evening actually held. I walked back through the hallway door and set the folder on the display table. Neither Warren nor Patricia had moved. I sat down across from them without saying anything about where I had been or how long the back rooms had kept me. The three of us were quiet for a moment. Then the front door opened. I was on my feet before the bell had finished sounding. Not because I had planned it, I hadn't, not precisely, but because 4 years of running a customer-facing business creates a reflex that doesn't stop for whatever is happening at the back of the house. The bell rang, and my body responded before my thoughts caught up, and by the time I was aware of making a decision, I was already moving. Margaret Holt came in the way she always came in, without urgency, without apology, with the ease of someone who has been returning to the same place for long enough that the threshold between outside and in has stopped registering as a transition. She was wearing the dark green November coat and carrying the cloth bag she brought when she planned to add to the order. Sloane, she smiled. I was hoping you'd still be in. Margaret. I came around the near end of the display counter. The shift in my voice was automatic, warmer, lighter, the register I used with people I was genuinely glad to see, and in Margaret's case I genuinely was. You're right on time. I pulled your order this morning. I was aware in the way you are aware of things you are deliberately not looking at, that Warren and Patricia had gone very still at the table behind me. They could not stand. They could not leave without making a scene that would require explanation. They could not speak without interrupting a customer interaction that had nothing to do with them. They could only sit in my showroom in my chairs with the tea I had made for them and watch. I retrieved Margaret's monthly order from the shelf behind the counter. 3 boxes wrapped in cream-colored paper sealed with the pressed wax disc that carried the store's initial. I set them on the counter and slid the largest toward her first. The cedar blend is restocked, I said. I know you finished yours early last month. I was overly generous with it. She lifted the box and held it to her nose through the paper, a habit of hers I had always liked. Is there something new this season? I heard you launched something. Just this week. I turned to the front display and brought down the smallest version of the new bottle Winter Number 2. This year's iteration built on the same foundational formula I had first adapted from Frances's notebook 4 years ago. I removed the stopper and held the bottle toward her. Smoked cardamom at the top. It opens cold and then settles into something warmer. Margaret held out her wrist without being asked. I tilted the bottle. She waited 4 full seconds, which was exactly the right amount of time, which was one of the many things I appreciated about her, and then she inhaled. Oh, she said, just that. Give it another minute to develop, I said. I can set one aside for December if you'd prefer to think about it. Don't you dare! She was already reaching into her bag. Add it to the order. I wrapped the additional bottle and updated the total. Margaret paid without looking at the screen, the gesture of someone who had never had reason not to trust the number they were about to see. I handed her the receipt and helped her arrange the boxes in the cloth bag. She paused at the edge of the counter before turning toward the door. You look well, she said. This place just keeps getting better. Not as a compliment, as an observation, the way you note something that has simply become true over time. Every time I come in, something has changed in exactly the right way. I'll tell Frances you said so. It came out before I had considered it, the name, the habit of mentioning her, the reflex I had never quite managed to break. I steadied it. The original formulas were hers. I'm still working from her notes. Margaret nodded. She had heard some version of this before and received it the way she received everything, without too much, without too little. She moved toward the door. The bell sounded when she opened it, and then she was gone, and the door swung shut, and the showroom was quiet in the particular way it goes quiet when the last customer has left, and the room belongs to whoever remains. I stood at the counter with my back to the table for 2 seconds. Then I turned, walked back to my chair, and sat down. I opened the folder. I smoothed the first page flat with the edge of my hand. I did not look up immediately. Sorry about that, I said. She comes every month. 3 years, never missed a single order. Warren set his tea down. A moment passed. You built something real here, he said. I know. I looked up. That's exactly why we're having this conversation instead of a different one. What different one? The one where I had already called the police when you walked in. I turned the folder toward him and slid it across the table. Now, let me show you what I'm actually proposing. Warren looked at the folder. He looked at me. He picked it up, and I watched the exact moment he registered that it was not the folder he had brought. His version was still at the edge of the table where he had set it hours ago. Its color-coded tabs aligned its flagged signature lines, waiting. The folder in his hands now was different. Lighter. No tabs along the edge. What is this? My version. I kept my voice even, unhurried. It's more precise. Start at the top. He turned to the first page. He read the title. His eyes came up. This isn't an equity transfer. Keep reading, I said. I'll explain the parts that matter when you get there. He looked at me for a moment, the particular look of a man whose room has just shifted in a way he did not authorize. A brief recalibration visible only in the slight tightening around his eyes. Then he looked back at the page. He turned to page 2, then page 3. On page 3 he slowed. I watched him read the small narrowing of the eyes, the barely perceptible return to the top of a paragraph that had required a second pass. Something on that page had asked more of him than he had expected to give. I had been expecting this. I had the response ready, accurate and complete, exactly as Eleanor had prepared me for. When the question came, I would know what to say, and precisely how to say it. I waited. My father had spent 30 years reading rooms. The problem, the specific, irreversible problem, was that this was my room and I had been arranging it for 3 days. He had stopped at page 3 because of the asset guarantee clause. I had expected that. I had the answer ready. It's standard language, I said. Every secured instrument above a certain value includes a guarantee provision. It protects both sides, it documents the obligation, so there's no ambiguity later about what was agreed to and under what terms. I turned to page 3 and indicated the relevant paragraph without drawing attention to what was on the pages before or after it. The clause only activates if there's a default event. If you make the scheduled payments, which you will because you have every reason to, this clause will never do anything. It's protective paperwork. It exists to keep the arrangement clean and defensible. Warren read the paragraph once more, then he looked up. What's the payment schedule? Monthly installments. 3% interest, simple, not compounding. The structure is in Exhibit A at the back. I can walk through it, or you can read it. It's straightforward. He turned to the back. He read the exhibit for 30 seconds. The terms were genuinely favorable, more favorable than anything his current creditors were offering, and I watched that calculation land quietly on his face. He was deciding whether the reasonable terms made this opportunity better, or whether they made it worth being suspicious of. He decided better. That was what I had been counting on. All right, he said. Not agreement, not yet, but the resistance had shifted from structural to procedural, and procedural resistance was a different problem with a different solution. Before we go through the signatures, I said I need to handle one formality. My accountant is particular about this. I reached into my jacket pocket for my phone, a natural, unhurried motion, the way you reach for something when you're looking for a pen, and set it on the counter beside the folder. I opened the voice memo application and pressed record. My accountant requires documentation of any business transaction discussed verbally before signing standard protocol when the amount exceeds $10,000. It keeps everything categorized correctly for year-end. Warren glanced at the phone, then at me, then at the documents. He saw a daughter who had built something real and was protecting it. The way careful people protect careful things with documentation, with procedure, with the particular brand of caution that is completely unsurprising in someone who has managed everything alone for 4 years, without anyone to catch them if something went wrong. He did not see anything else. In addition, I said, settling back slightly, my accountant needs to establish that tonight's transaction is the first formal one between us. There's a prior financial interaction that needs to be noted and distinguished from this one. It affects the categorization. It's a one-time administrative item. I kept my voice even throughout, practical, mildly tedious, the voice of someone navigating a procedural requirement they have navigated before. It won't take long. I looked at him directly. The loan, I said, the one that was opened in my name when I was 20 years old. Warren went very still. It was not the stillness of someone caught. It was the stillness of a person who has been tracking multiple conversations simultaneously and has just heard the one they were not quite prepared for. Patricia looked at the table. $47,000, I continued. It appeared on my credit report in March of 2019, originated in the spring of 2016. My accountant simply needs confirmation that tonight's transaction is separate from that prior one, not connected to it. That's all. That was handled poorly, Warren said. He had found his footing again, measured, controlled. It was always our intention to address it. I understand. I kept my expression neutral, the expression of someone receiving information rather than processing it emotionally. Did you use my social security number to open it? A pause. Warren looked at the phone. The small record indicator was visible if you were looking for it, and Warren was now looking for it, and the 2 seconds of calculation behind his eyes were the most transparent I had seen him all evening. He was deciding whether the question was the kind you answered or the kind you declined, and he was weighing what declining it would look like to the person sitting across from him who still had something he needed. The problem was that declining it would create exactly the kind of moment he was trying to avoid. We used information we had access to at the time, he said. You were not directly consulted before it was opened. Thank you. My expression did not change. That's everything the record needs. Patricia's hands folded on the table, pressed slightly tighter together. I noticed it the way I noticed everything at that table tonight, exactly without reacting. Now, I said. Signatures. I lifted the pen from the holder beside the counter and placed it on top of the folder. I'll read the title of each document aloud before you sign. I want everything to be completely clear between us. I stood slightly to reposition the folder across the table, and as I did, I looked toward the hallway entrance at the rear of the showroom. Eleanor Marsh was standing there. She had come through the door at the precise moment I needed her to, which was not a coincidence. It was timing we had established before she had walked into the back of the building 4 hours earlier. She was holding her laptop and the unlabeled folder, and her coat was still folded over her arm, and she stood at the far end of my showroom with the particular stillness of someone who has entered many rooms under difficult circumstances and has already taken the measure of this one. Warren looked up at the sound of the door. He saw her. Something happened in his face that I had not seen happen to it all evening, a genuine disruption, a real break in the surface, the specific expression of a man who has encountered something his preparation did not account for and is doing the rapid private arithmetic of how significant a problem that is. Eleanor Marsh, he said, not a question. Her name stated the way you state a name when the simple fact of a person's presence is the thing that needs to be confirmed before anything else can follow. His voice had changed, not louder, not quieter, but different in texture, stripped of the smooth professional register he had been maintaining for the past 2.5 hours. This was not the room he thought he was in. The question formed visibly on his face, even though he did not speak it. How long had she been here, and what did she know, and what exactly had he just said out loud on a recording with her in the building? He stopped. He looked at me. The last time I had seen Eleanor and my father in the same room, I was 12 years old, and they were arguing over a fence line at the edge of the Millbrook properties. He had lost that argument too, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely, which was the only way Eleanor won things. Warren's face had not quite finished processing the fact of her presence when she crossed the showroom toward us. She moved at the same pace she always moved, deliberate, unhurried, the pace of someone who has already determined what is going to happen next and is simply getting there. "What is she doing here?" Warren asked. He addressed the question to me, not to her, which was a mistake. "I'm Sloane's attorney," Eleanor said before I could answer. She set her laptop and the unlabeled folder on the counter beside me and stood there with her coat still folded over her arm, as composed as she had been when she walked through the back door 4 hours ago. "I've been her attorney for 7 years. This is a family matter. It became a legal matter when you threatened to interfere with her Series A investors." Eleanor's voice was level, not warm, not aggressive, the specific register of someone who has determined that the situation does not require emotion to resolve. "I'm here in that capacity. You're welcome to consult your own attorney before signing anything tonight. That's entirely your right." Warren looked at me. "You prepared all of this before we arrived," he said, not a question. "Yes," I held his eyes. 3 days ago." "How did you know we were coming?" "The same way you knew what time I close on Wednesdays." I let that sit for a moment. People talk to the wrong people sometimes. It works in more than one direction. He processed that the brief private arithmetic of a man reassessing how much of tonight had already been decided before he walked in. "The loan," he said to Eleanor. "If we default—" "The asset guarantee activates," Eleanor said. "Standard terms. If you make the scheduled payments, the clause will never become relevant to anything." She uncapped the pen she had brought and set it on the table in front of him, not in his hand, on the table where he would have to make the choice to pick it up. "Warren, your creditors have been asking for documented evidence of assets. That is exactly what this provides." She looked at him with the expression she used in every courtroom I had ever seen her in, certain, untroubled. "Do you want them to have it or not?" He looked at the pen for a long moment. Then he reached for it. "Before anyone signs," Eleanor said, positioning herself beside the near end of the counter, "I'm going to read the title of every document aloud, every title in full. I want everything that occurs at this table tonight to be completely clear." She looked at Warren, then at Patricia. "That's not negotiable." Warren set the pen down. He nodded once. Eleanor opened the 11-page folder to the first page. She read without preamble, without introduction, in the same even voice she used for everything that mattered. "Secured business loan agreement between Sloane M. Voss, LLC, and Warren Voss, personal guarantor, and Patricia Voss, personal guarantor. The loan amount reflects outstanding debt obligations outlined in Exhibit A." She set the folder down. "Questions before we proceed?" Warren looked at me. "This isn't an equity transfer." "No." I kept my voice practical. The voice of someone explaining something that is genuinely straightforward once you understand the logic. A loan note is actually cleaner for what you need. Equity transfer creates a paper trail that your creditors will want to examine. It raises questions about valuation, about existing investor agreements, about whether the transfer was conducted at arm's length. A secured note shows them a documented obligation without any of that complexity. It gives them exactly what they've been asking for. He looked at the document, he looked at Eleanor, he looked at me. The calculation was happening, I could see the shape of it. The interest rate was lower than anything he was currently carrying. The payment schedule was workable. The process was being conducted correctly with documentation, with an attorney present on both sides of the table. Everything about the evening looked like a difficult situation being handled responsibly. He had driven 4 hours to get his daughter to sign something. She was giving him something to sign instead, and the terms were better than he had any right to expect. He had read the first page. He had read the exhibit. He had not opened to page 7. He picked up the pen. He signed the last page. He initialed where the colored tabs indicated without reading what each tab was marking, because people who believe they are winning do not read the fine print of things going their way. Patricia turned to the signature pages. She did what she had done with documents presented to her by Warren for 30 years. She located the line with her name printed below it and placed her signature above it. She turned to the next flagged page. She signed again. She did not read the paragraphs that separated the pages from each other, because she never had, because Warren had always told her what she was signing, and that had always been sufficient. When the last page was done, she set the pen on the table. Eleanor looked at both signatures. She noted the timestamp on her phone. She placed the 11-page folder into her bag with the care of something being properly filed rather than simply set aside. "Thank you," she said. "There's one more item." She reached for the unlabeled folder, the thin one she had carried in hours ago, without explaining the one she had kept separated from everything else throughout the evening. She placed it on the table. She opened it to the first page. She did not place it in front of Warren. She placed it in front of Patricia. And then she looked at Patricia, not at Warren, not at me, and said with the same level exact voice she had used for everything else tonight, "Mrs. Voss, this part is specifically for you. Please read it before I say anything." The table went completely still. Patricia looked down at the open folder. I was watching her face, not the document her face, because I had been watching faces at this table all evening, and I knew what information they contained if you looked at the right parts at the right moment. I saw exactly when she found the date at the top of the page. September 14th, 2017. A Tuesday. A date that would have meant nothing to most people reading it. A date from 8 years ago, unremarkable, filed in a document that had spent nearly a decade in a creditor's records. I watched Patricia's eyes go still. Then I watched them move to the bottom of the page, to the signature line, to the initials beside it, to the handwriting she had been producing on documents for 55 years, and that she would have recognized in a fraction of a second in any context, under any circumstances. Her own name, her own handwriting, on something she had not known she had signed. There is a moment in every room when the structure of it shifts, when what looked like 4 walls turns out to be 3 walls and a door you hadn't seen. My father reached that moment at 8:32 in the evening on a Wednesday in November, and I had been waiting for it since Monday. I looked at Warren, then at Patricia, who had still not looked up from the thin folder Eleanor had placed in front of her, the September 2017 date. At the top of the first page, the signature at the bottom that was hers, and that she had not known was hers. Her pen was still in her hand. She had not set it down since she finished signing. 2 days ago, I said Eleanor contacted Warren's 3 creditors. She purchased the outstanding loan obligations, all of them from all 3 holders at 55 cents on the dollar. The transaction was funded through the business line of credit attached to my Series A, and it was completed on the 11th of November. I let that settle for exactly 1 second. That means I'm your creditor now. The $385,000 is still owed. It's just owed to me. The silence that followed had a specific texture. It was not the silence of a room waiting for something to happen. It was the silence of a room that had already absorbed something and had not yet finished the process of integrating it. Warren sat completely still. His hands, which he had kept carefully relaxed on the table for the past 3 hours, curled inward at the fingers. I counted in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. "The document you signed," I continued into the silence, "confirms that the loan is a personal obligation secured against your assets. Your signature is on page 11. Eleanor witnessed it. The timestamp is on the recording." I looked at him steadily. The payment schedule, the interest rate, the guarantee provisions, all of it is exactly what Eleanor read aloud before you picked up the pen. Warren stood. Not fully, he got halfway to his feet and stopped the way people stop when they realize that standing up hasn't resolved the problem they stood to address. "You set us up," he said. His voice had changed. The smooth, managed quality he had maintained since he walked in was gone. What was underneath it was older and considerably less controlled. "I prepared for what you were going to do," I said. "Those are different things." He stopped. He looked at the table. He started again. "You bought my debt, before we even arrived here tonight." He looked at me with an expression I had seen on his face once before years ago. The expression he reserved for things that had not gone according to his expectations, and about which he was deciding whether to admit it. 2 days ago. "Your creditors were relieved to have a buyer. 3 months in default, no credible repayment path visible on any timeline they could work with. 55 cents recovered more than they had expected to see." I kept my hands flat on the surface of the table. "The debt exists, Warren. The terms I'm offering are better than anything you currently carry. 3% interest, simple, not compounding. A payment schedule your accountant can structure. I'm not moving on your house. I'm not touching your retirement accounts. I'm giving you the organized path out that you told me tonight you needed. To my own daughter. To Sloane's LLC." I looked at him steadily. "Which I built alone. 4 years. No call from anyone in this family, not once." I paused. "I would have helped you, if you had simply asked." He looked at Eleanor. He was searching for the version of this room that still made sense, and she was the variable his preparation had not accounted for. "You helped her do this," he said. "I helped her protect what's hers," Eleanor said. Not unkindly, not apologetically, in the manner of someone stating something that is simply accurate and does not require defense. "I've been doing that for 7 years. This is extortion." "Extortion is what you described when you mentioned Hargrove Capital and one conversation with the right person," Eleanor said. "What Sloane did is purchase a legitimate debt obligation at market rate and execute a signed agreement in front of counsel. You were present. You were informed of every title before the pen touched the page." She met his eyes without adjusting. "The word you're looking for is transaction." Warren looked at the 11-page folder on the table, the one with his signature on the last page. He looked at the thin, unlabeled folder in front of Patricia. Patricia had not moved. She was still looking at the first page of the folder. "Not the way you look at something you are still absorbing, but the way you look at something you have absorbed completely and are sitting with because you have not yet found a place to put it." The pen remained in her hand. She had been holding it since she finished signing, and I did not think she was aware of it anymore. "The date on this document," Patricia said. Her voice was very quiet. She was not speaking to the room. She was speaking to the page in front of her. "September 2017. "Yes," Eleanor said. The silence that followed was different from the one before. It had a different weight, a different shape. The first silence had been Warren processing information. This one was something else entirely, the particular quiet of a room in which something has just become irreversible. Warren looked at Patricia. And I saw it happen the precise moment when he understood what Eleanor had placed on that table. His eyes moved from Patricia's face to the open folder to Eleanor's face, and in that movement, I watched the prepared responses clear out the calculation, collapse the surface he had been maintaining for 3 hours, come apart in exactly the way surfaces come apart when they meet the one specific thing they were not built to withstand. "Don't," he said to Eleanor. One word. Without pleas, without explanation, without either of those things, because he did not have time for them and because he understood that the person he was saying it to already knew the answer. Eleanor looked at him. "She has a right to know," she said. My mother had spent the entire evening performing certainty. What I watched happen to her face when she read the second page of that document was the end of the performance, not dramatically, but completely, the way a light goes out. She was still looking at the page when Eleanor moved her chair around to Patricia's side of the table, not to Warren's side, not to mine, and sat down beside her. It was a small, deliberate repositioning, and it changed the geometry of the room in a way that Warren noticed and that I had been expecting. September 14th, 2017, Eleanor said. Her voice was quiet, not soft exactly, but careful in the way a person is careful with something that has real weight. That is your signature on line 4. It's a personal guarantee on a $210,000 business loan. The primary borrower on that loan defaulted last August. The creditor has been pursuing the secondary guarantee since then. She paused. You have been a co-debtor on that obligation for 8 years without knowing it. Patricia was looking at her own handwriting. I had watched her sign the 11-page folder 20 minutes ago. The practiced automatic motion of someone who had been placing her signature on documents presented by Warren for 30 years. She had found the line with her name printed below it, and written above it the way she had always done because that was how it had always worked. Now she was reading the page. Actually reading it going back to the top and working through the language with her eyes, and I could see from the way they moved that she was not finding something unfamiliar. She was finding something she recognized. The lender's name, the amount, the date. Pieces of something she had been standing adjacent to 8 years ago and had not known she was adjacent to. He told me it was insurance paperwork, Patricia said. Her voice had come apart in a way I couldn't name precisely, not broken, but different, stripped of the particular shaping she had been maintaining since she walked into this room. He put it with 3 other forms. He said it was the annual policy update. Patricia. Eleanor's voice was exact without being unkind, the register she used for everything she considered important. You don't need to explain it to me. I signed it. Patricia looked at Warren. Not at me, at Warren directly, with a look that lasted long enough to fill the room. You made me sign something I didn't know I was signing. The loan was supposed to be repaid within the year. Warren's voice was attempting to find the smooth register it had carried all evening and falling short of it. It was a short-term arrangement. The repayment was supposed to. 8 years, Warren. Patricia set the page down on the table. She set it down carefully, the way you place something you want to stay exactly where you put it. 8 years. The room went completely still. I looked at my mother, the woman I had not spoken to in 6 years. The woman whose role in the story of what had happened to me had been clear and uncomplicated for a long time. I was 3 feet away from her while she absorbed the fact that the person she had spent 30 years standing beside had been conducting a separate set of arrangements that she had not been included in, had not been informed of, and had been made legally responsible for without her knowledge. I did not know what to do with the thing happening in my chest. It was not sympathy, not cleanly. It was not grief, not for her, not yet, and perhaps not ever. It was something that existed in the space between recognizing a person's pain and understanding that you are not the one who is responsible for resolving it, something that didn't have a single word for it that I had access to in that moment. She can challenge the guarantee, I said to Eleanor quietly, legally, if she argues she signed under false pretenses. Yes. Eleanor nodded once. Fraud in the inducement, it's a recognized offense and given the circumstances, a persuasive one. She looked at Patricia, not at Warren. But pursuing it means litigation. It means discovery. It means everything Warren has done, the personal loans, the $47,000 in Sloane's name. This guarantee becomes part of the public court record. A pause. That is your decision to make, not mine, not Sloane's. Patricia was not looking at either of us. She was looking at a point on the surface of the table approximately 8 inches in front of her. Warren shifted. Pat, he said. Patricia's eyes moved to him. Don't call me that right now. The 4 words landed in the room without elevation of voice, without drama, without the particular weight that comes from raising something. She said them the way you say something that is simply and completely true, and after she said them, she looked back at the table, and the room became quiet in a way that was different from all the other quiet moments the evening had made. Patricia looked up at me. Not the measured, calibrated look she had been giving me all evening, the one she had been using to communicate precisely as much as she intended to communicate. This was different. This was the look of someone who has stopped directing the look and is simply looking because the script they had been working from has become unavailable, and there is nothing left to do but see the room as it actually is. I looked back at her. I did not say anything. I had thought about this moment in various forms many times over 6 years. what I would say to her, what she would say to me, how the accounting between us might eventually work. In none of those versions had I imagined sitting in silence. But I understood now that silence was the only thing available to me that would not either overstep what I was certain of or undersell what I was not. There are moments when silence is the only response that doesn't cause more damage. This was one of them. Patricia held my eyes for 3 seconds. Then she pushed her chair back from the table. She stood up. Her back was straight. She did not look at Warren. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair and held it in both hands, and for a moment she was simply a woman standing in a room holding a coat, which was one of the most ordinary things a person could do and which looked right now like the most deliberate. "I would like to leave," she said. Warren moved a shift forward in his chair, a half turn toward her. "We need to—" I said I would like to leave. No elevation. No force. The words came out with the particular completeness of something that had been decided and was not available for discussion, and there was nothing in Warren's expression in the moment after she said them that indicated he was going to try. I watched my mother stand in the middle of my showroom. I had spent 6 years assigning her a role. The role had been uncomplicated, and it had let me do what I needed to do, and I did not think it had been entirely wrong. She had come here tonight, she had participated, she had been part of what arrived at my door. But the woman standing in the center of my room right now, with her coat in both hands and her back straight, and everything she had spent the evening performing, finally gone from her face, she was not the role I had assigned. For the first time all evening, something shifted in my chest that had nothing to do with what happened next. Warren had one move left, and I had been waiting for it since the moment he walked in, the shift from negotiation to threat, the final recalibration of a man who has exhausted his better options and is down to the last thing he knows how to do. He started talking before Patricia had fully settled. She was still standing with her coat, and Warren seemed to have determined that if he could generate enough momentum in the room, that momentum would substitute for the plan that had just come apart around him. "This is coercion," he said. His voice had found a new register, not the smooth, controlled tone of 3 hours ago, but something underneath it older and considerably less managed. "You can call it whatever you want. I know what it is." He looked at Eleanor. "And I will have your license in front of a bar review board before the end of the month." Eleanor did not respond. "You cannot do this." He turned to me. "To your own father. You sat across that table and orchestrated every piece of this. You bought the debt in secret. You arranged for counsel without telling us. You set up a recording device. That is not how a family handles its affairs." He looked at the room the way a person looks at something they believe they can still change. "A judge will see exactly what this is." I let him finish. He had more. He talked about what he had provided the house I had grown up in, the years he had put toward a version of family that I was now in his telling dismantling for spite. He talked about courts and how they read cases involving adult children making claims against parents, about how what I had done would look from the outside. He talked for approximately 4 minutes. He was not making an argument. He was making noise, the specific kind of noise that fills the space where an argument used to be, and I had learned a long time ago that you did not interrupt noise, because interrupting it gave it a coherence it didn't have on its own. You waited. You let it run out. When he stopped, the room was quiet. Eleanor opened her laptop. "The recording is valid under applicable state law," she said. "You were informed that the conversation was being recorded, and you continued to participate. The loan agreement is a legally executed instrument signed in the presence of licensed counsel, time-stamped witnessed. A UCC lien notice will be filed within 30 days, which becomes part of the public commercial record, regardless of any subsequent legal action you choose to initiate." She looked at him across the top of her screen. "You're welcome to retain your own attorney. I would encourage it. But I want to be clear about what a court proceeding requires full disclosure. The personal loans the account opened in Sloane's name in 2016, the guarantee signed by Patricia in 2017, all of it becomes public record at the moment a case is filed. That is the nature of discovery." Warren looked at the laptop. He looked at the folder. He looked at the room the way a person looks when they are trying to locate the door they came in through and finding that the geography has changed. I won't move on the house, I said. I won't touch retirement accounts. Eleanor's office will send you a payment schedule within the week, monthly installments, 3% simple interest. Lower than any commercial lender is going to offer you, and you have had enough conversations with creditors this year to know precisely what that means in practice. You planned every piece of this. Yes. I looked at him steadily. Because you planned every piece of what you drove 4 hours to do tonight, and I was not willing to let you do it. I am your father, he said. He said it the way people say things when they believe the words themselves are supposed to do the work flatly, without inflection, as a fact. They expect to reorganize everything around it. I looked at him for a moment. I stood up. You stopped being that, I said, the day you explained to me that the $47,000 in my name was what families did. I kept my voice exactly where it had been all evening, level, unhurried, not raised. This moment did not need volume. I spent 3 years paying that off on my own. Then I spent 4 years building this. I did not gesture toward the room. I did not need to. Without a phone call from you, without a cosigner, without a single person from this family present for any of it. Not for the lease, not for the opening, not once in 4 years. I paused. I would have helped you tonight if you had called me like a person calls someone when they need something, and asked for it. He looked at me for a long time. The version of me he had built his preparation around the 23-year-old on the studio floor, the daughter who paid the debt quietly and said nothing, the person whose silence under pressure he had been counting on. She was not in this room. I watched him look for her. I watched the moment when he stopped. I moved to the counter. My left hand found the small recessed button under the edge of the surface installed 18 months ago after the studio space across the street was broken into, and I had spent an afternoon with a security consultant mapping the store's non-emergency protocols. I pressed it once. The room looked exactly the same. The alarm was entirely silent. Non-emergency dispatch would log it and route a patrol unit. Estimated arrival 9:05. 10 minutes. I came back to the edge of the table. I didn't sit. I leaned forward slightly toward Warren, just enough that what I said next belonged to him and not to the room. You confirmed on the recording that you used my identifying information to open a loan account without my knowledge or consent, I said quietly. I'm keeping it. I will keep it for as long as it takes for you to understand that the financial arrangement between us is now settled and documented. You will make the payments on the schedule Eleanor provides, or the guarantee clause activates, and everything that follows that activation is no longer my decision to manage. I straightened. Those are the terms, I said. That's what tonight is. Warren didn't say anything. He had been talking for the better part of 3 hours, and now he was not talking, and the silence had a completely different quality from any of the silences earlier in the evening. Not strategic, not weighted with calculation, just the sound that absence of options makes when the room has gone still enough to hear it. Patricia had not moved. She was still holding her coat in both hands, the same position she had been in when she said she wanted to leave the coat held in front of her, like something she had picked up and had not yet found a place to put. I looked at the clock on the wall behind the counter. 8:55. I looked at Warren. I looked at Patricia. I had spent 6 years building the architecture of this moment, what I would do, what I would say, what I would feel when it was finished. I had imagined something clean, something with a clear shape. What I felt instead was not victory. It was something heavier than that, and quieter than grief, the particular density of a thing that has been resolved, and has not in the resolving become any less complicated than it was. It had gone exactly as planned. That was the answer. It was also the thing about the answer that I understood I was going to be sitting with for a long time after tonight. Jamie appeared in the doorway at the top of the showroom. She was standing exactly where she had been appearing all evening. The connecting doorway between the front display and the main floor, the doorway she had learned to position herself in during situations that were still developing and might need her. She was looking at me. She was not looking at Warren or Patricia or Eleanor. She was waiting for a signal, and she knew what it meant because we had discussed exactly this sequence 3 days ago in the back office with the cold coffee and the closed door. I looked at her. I nodded once, Jamie had been my floor manager for 3 years. She had handled difficult customers, a delivery incident involving 6 broken spray mechanisms, and an afternoon when the ventilation system failed in the middle of a private demonstration, and she had kept the room calm by offering everyone cold water and pretending the temperature was entirely intentional. She handled this the same way professionally and without making any additional noise. She approached the table from the side, not the front where she would have entered Warren's direct line, but from the edge in the careful way you approach something that has been very hot and might still be. She addressed them both with the particular pleasant neutrality of someone who understands that customer service at its highest use is a form of architecture. "Your vehicle is in a posted time limit zone on the street out front," she said. "I'd hate for you to end up with a citation on top of everything. If you're ready, I can walk you to the door." It was, I thought, some of the finest diplomacy I had ever seen delivered at close range. Warren looked at me. He had been looking at me on and off for 3 hours, and this look was different from all the ones before it. It was the look of a person who still has something to say and has run out of the particular resource that makes saying things possible. He held it for 3 full seconds. Then he picked up his coat from the back of the chair without a word. Patricia had already picked up her bag. She did not look at Warren. She did not look at me. She did not look at Eleanor. She stood with her coat on her arm and her bag on her shoulder, and she walked toward the front of the showroom in the same straight-backed, deliberate way she had been standing for the past 15 minutes, the walk of someone who has decided exactly where they are going and has no interest in anything on either side of the path. Jamie opened the front door. Warren stopped in this doorway. He put one hand on the frame, a brief steadying contact, and spoke to the room behind him without turning to face it. "You'll regret this," he said. I waited 1 beat. "Maybe." I kept my voice the same register it had been all evening. "But I'll regret it with my business intact." He didn't answer that. He went through the door. Jamie followed him out and held it from the exterior side, and I heard the brief exchange of night air coming in November, cold, the smell of wet pavement and car exhaust from the street, and then the door swung shut. The showroom went quiet. Eleanor and I were the only people left in it. I sat down. It was the first time I had sat at that table without a purpose attached to the sitting, without a document to reposition, or a signal to manage, or a face across from me whose reactions I was tracking. I sat down because my legs, which had been holding me upright since 5:30 in the afternoon, had decided they were finished. Eleanor sat across from me. She set her laptop on the table and did not open it. "How are you?" she asked. I looked at the table. 2 cold cups of tea, Warren's, with a small amount left in the bottom, Patricia's empty. The folder Warren had brought was still at the edge of the table where he had placed it hours ago. Its color-coded tabs aligned its flagged signature lines, waiting for a conversation that had turned into a different one. "Like I just paid off a debt," I said. Eleanor nodded once. It was the nod she used when something was true and did not require addition. I had seen it in conference rooms and in her office and in the back of this store, and it always meant the same thing. This is correct, and there is nothing useful to put after it. "You could have ended this at 6 o'clock, she said. "Called the police and had them removed. You had sufficient grounds by then." "I know. Why didn't you?" I looked through the open door of the mixing room. From where I was sitting, I could see the edge of the workbench and the corner where Francis's notebook sat in the position it had occupied for 4 years. "Because I needed him to say it out loud," I said. "Not for the recording." I paused. "For me. I needed to hear it said in a room that I built so I could stop hearing it the way he said it the first time, in that first phone call, the way he said it like it was simply a fact about how the world worked and I was the one who hadn't understood the terms yet." I stopped. I needed the version that existed in this room tonight to be louder than the one I've been carrying since 2019. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "Did it work?" she asked. "Ask me in a month." She accepted that without pushing it. She picked up her pen, made a brief note in the margin of something in her file, and then closed it. The click of the clasp was the only sound in the room. I stood up and walked through the open door into the mixing room. The overhead panels came on automatically when I crossed the threshold. The workbench was exactly as I had left it, jars in their labeled positions, the small scale at its correct angle, the testing strips fanned beside the amber bottles on the back shelf. Everything was where I had placed it. That was one of the things I had decided about this room a long time ago. It was going to be a place where things stayed, where I put them. Francis's notebook was in the corner of the bench. I set my palm flat on the cover, not opening it, just placing my hand on the brown leather, feeling the worn softness of it, the places where the binding had been repaired once, and where the corners had gone smooth from handling. 30 years of her hands on it before it became mine. I had needed it enough times over the past 4 years that I had stopped consciously thinking of needing it, which I believed was probably what she would have wanted. I stood there for a moment, then I went back out. Jamie was at the front of the showroom finishing the overnight lighting sequence. The full brightness of the displays softened and drew back to the warm background level they held after close. Only the counter lights and the mixing room panels remained at full strength, and the room settled into the quality it had when I was here alone, quieter and more itself than it was during business hours, as though the room had its own preferred state, and closing time was when it got to return to it. The cedar and jasmine from the diffusers were still in the air. The scent had been running since this morning and would continue for another 40 minutes before the timer cut it. It smelled like a Wednesday at Sloane's, which was exactly what it had been. My phone buzzed on the counter. "Is it over?" "Gavin." 3 words sent from somewhere in the building or perhaps from the sidewalk by now. He had been at the front of the showroom at 8:15 as I had asked, and he had watched Warren and Patricia walk past him and through the door, and he had waited until they were gone before he sent anything. I held the phone for a moment longer than the question required. I thought about the conversation that tomorrow was going to involve sitting down with him and going through what had happened, what it meant for where things stood between us, what I was and wasn't willing to do, about the 18 months he had put into an application that was now complicated in ways it hadn't been before I got involved. I didn't know yet what I was going to say. I knew it was going to take longer than one conversation to figure out. Yes. I set the phone face down on the counter. I picked up my jacket from the chair where I had left it at 7:05. I put it on. I picked up the 11-page folder. Eleanor's copy was in her bag, and mine went into mine, where it would stay until it needed to be somewhere else. Eleanor was already at the back door, coat on. Jamie had finished with the lights. She was standing by the back exit, with her bag waiting without performing the waiting, which was one of the specific things I valued most about her. I looked at the showroom one last time. I turned off the counter light. 5 weeks after that Wednesday, Eleanor filed the UCC lien against Warren's personal assets. The court processed it without incident, the way courts process things when the paperwork is correct and no one contests it. Quietly. Completely. The lien entered the public commercial record, and the world continued without pause. I know the date because I had written it on the small desk calendar in the back office, December 19th, a Thursday. I went through the rest of the day the way I went through most Thursdays, restocking the cedar display, reviewing Q4 inventory numbers, with Jamie testing a vetiver concentration that had been sitting in the formulation queue since October. The lien had been filed. The documentation was in order. There was nothing left to do about it, so I did other things. December 31st arrived the way it always arrived, at the end of everything that had come before it. I was in the back office at 6:15 when my phone showed an incoming call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. I didn't listen that night. I listened the following morning, sitting at the desk in my coat, coffee in hand. 3 minutes and 14 seconds. Warren talked about fairness, what was fair, what wasn't, what he believed I had misunderstood about the nature of what he had done, and why. He talked about family as a category of obligation with its own rules and standards of accountability. He talked about legacy, which was the word he used when he meant what people would remember. His voice was slower than the last time I had heard it in person, less managed, more tired. The voice of a man speaking without the performance rather than underneath it. I listened to it twice. Then I deleted it. January 7th was a Wednesday, a quieter one than the last, when a text arrived from a number I had not saved, but recognized from the area code. 5 words. "I didn't know, I'm sorry." I sat with that for a long time. Long enough to get a second cup of coffee, come back and sit with it some more. I thought about the thin, unlabeled folder. The September 2017 date at the top of the page. My mother's handwriting at the bottom of something she had signed without understanding what she was agreeing to. I thought about the woman who had said we weren't ready and said it in the voice that was not performing. I believed her. That was what surprised me. I had prepared not to believe her, and I did. The believing didn't simplify anything. It didn't reconstruct 6 years. Believing someone is not the same as knowing what to do with the believing, and I did not know yet what I was going to do with it. What I did that Wednesday morning in January was block the number, not because I had made a permanent decision, because I hadn't made any decision yet, and I needed the room in which to make one. That room had to be mine to occupy at whatever pace I chose. Eleanor called the following week. The payment schedule has been delivered. Warren confirmed receipt. Did he respond? Confirmation is automatic when documents are delivered to a registered address. He doesn't need to respond. A pause. He'll pay Sloane. He doesn't have another option. I know. I was looking out the front window, a woman standing on the sidewalk reading the name on the glass. Sloane's. Eleanor, thank you. You did the work. I made sure the paperwork was correct. That's all any of us can do. Yes, she said, exactly that. January was a good month for the store. The best January in 4 years of Januaries. The winter display sold through entirely by the 22nd. That had never happened before. I hired a second perfumer named Renata, who had trained in Lyon and held very particular opinions about vetiver sourcing, which made her immediately compatible with the way I ran the workroom. Jamie restructured the appointment calendar for a longer consultation queue. The wait list for spring #1, mentioned only once in the store's newsletter, was 47 people. On a Tuesday afternoon at the end of January, after Jamie and Renata had left, and the front door was locked, I went into the mixing room. I had been doing this once a week since November, going in after close and staying for however long. Sometimes I worked. Sometimes I just stood there in the cold white light. The room had never seemed to mind either. I sat on the workbench stool and reached for Frances's notebook. I opened it to the first page. I always opened it to the first page. The blue fountain pen handwriting slanted and precise, winter #1. Top bergamot pink pepper. Heart iris cedarwood. Base vetiver white musk, beeswax absolute. Beside the beeswax entry, a small star and the single word patience. Frances Voss had written this more than 30 years before I first read it, in a house that no longer existed. Cleared in under a week, sold 18 months later, reduced to a cardboard box containing a silver bracelet, a pair of reading glasses, and a notebook. She died in the spring of 2018. 4 months later, Warren sold everything she had left. 8 months after that, I signed a lease and paid the first month's deposit with money saved from double shifts at a distribution company. The money had come from me. The formulas had come from her. The store had come from both, and from the years between then and now, which had also come from both of us in their way. She was still here, in the notebook and in the formulas, and in the 47 people waiting for a spring version of something she had started 30 years ago. I held the notebook open for a moment. Then I closed it and placed it back in its corner, exactly where it had been for 4 years, exactly where it would be when I came in tomorrow. The mixing room went dark. I stood in the doorway and looked at the showroom in the low overnight light. The street lamp outside fell across the tiled floor in a long, faint rectangle. From where I was standing, the gold lettering on the window read, backwards, Sinals. I stood there a moment longer than I needed to. Then I put on my coat, picked up my bag, and pushed the door open. January cold and clean. The sidewalk was dry. The street was quiet. I locked the door behind me. I walked. I did not look back. Looking back at everything, I realize I spent 6 years getting to a place I could have reached with one honest decision made sooner. There's something I heard growing up and only understood much later, that God doesn't place on your shoulders more than you can carry. I believe that. But I also believe He doesn't intend for you to keep carrying it forever, without ever choosing to set it down on your own terms, in your own time with your own hands. Don't be like me. Don't wait until you've been pushed to the edge before you act. If someone in your life is using family trust or love as a tool to take what belongs to you, document everything. Find someone who knows the law and never let your emotions move faster than your evidence. I won't pretend I was perfect in any of this. I was cold when I didn't have to be. I held the weight longer than was necessary. But I believe some lines have to be held not out of hatred, but because you deserve to live without asking permission to protect what you built. This is the story of someone who decided to stop being quiet. The ending isn't clean, but it's mine and I made it myself. If this story made you think, leave a comment below. Share it with someone you believe needs to hear it today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time to do that. Thank you for staying until the very last word. That means more than you know. Note: the stories on this channel are works of fiction created purely for educational and entertainment purposes. If this content isn't right for you, thank you for stopping by, and please feel free to find something that serves you better.